Sophia stood just outside the entrance of her modest apartment building, shifting uneasily on her feet as she faced Mrs. Jessica, the landlady. The older woman's sharp eyes bore into her, arms folded in clear disapproval. Sophia had fallen 2 months behind on rent, a fact she could no longer avoid. It wasn't that she had meant to ignore her obligations, but when money was tight, choices had to be made, and unfortunately for Mrs. Jessica, her rent had been pushed to the bottom of the list. "I had to settle my other debts first," Sophia tried to explain, her voice carrying an edge of desperation. "The lingerie shop, the perfume store, even the convenience store. I owed them all. If I didn't pay, they wouldn't let me buy on credit anymore, and that would have been a disaster." Mrs. Jessica's brow furrowed, irritation flickering across her face. "So, let me get this straight," she said, tilting her head. "You prioritized paying for underwear over having a place to live?" She let out a short, exasperated sigh. "Well, if that's the case, I guess you don't need a roof over your head, as long as you've got your fancy perfume and bras. But that won't work with me, Sophia. Either you pay up now, or you pack your things and leave. I'm not running a charity here." "Please, Mrs. Jessica," Sophia pleaded, clutching the older woman's arm with both hands. "I swear, I'll pay you soon, it's just this once." "I had no choice. If I lost my credit privileges, I'd be in even bigger trouble." Mrs. Jessica shook her head, unmoved. "And now you've lost your credit with me. 2 months is too long. I need that money, Sophia. You need to start packing." "But I have a gig tonight. I can pay you soon, I promise." Sophia's voice took on a more saccharine tone as she grasped at her last resort, flattery. She squeezed Mrs. Jessica's hand and smiled brightly. "You know, you're really an angel sent from above, Mrs. Jessica. That's why I thought you'd understand my situation." Mrs. Jessica's stern expression wavered, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Oh really? Now I'm an angel?" she said, one eyebrow arching in amusement. "Yes," Sophia exclaimed, seizing the moment. "You're the most beautiful person to ever descend from the heavens. Honestly, of all the landlords I've ever rented from, you're by far the kindest. That's why I love staying here." Mrs. Jessica let out a reluctant chuckle, shaking her head. "You really are something else, Sophia." She exhaled and lightly tapped the younger woman's shoulder. "Fine, fine. Just don't make me regret this. I expect that payment soon, understood? You're lucky I'm soft-hearted, otherwise you'd be spending the night on the street." Sophia nodded enthusiastically, her grin stretched wide. "Of course, Mrs. Jessica. You won't regret this, I promise." As soon as the landlady disappeared into the building, Sophia's smile faded. She rolled her eyes and let out a small scoff. That had been close, but she had pulled it off. Again, sweet-talking landlords was practically second nature to her at this point. Buying herself more time was the easy part. Now, she just had to figure out where she was actually going to get the rent money. Sophia stepped into her small, cluttered apartment and sank onto her tiny, worn-out couch. With a tired sigh, she pulled her phone from her pocket, her fingers lingering over the screen. Just as she was about to set it aside, it vibrated in her hand, the name, Rebecca, flashing across the display. She exhaled sharply before answering. "Hello? Hey, are you in or not?" Rebecca's voice came through the line, brisk and to the point. "Anna's down with a fever. She can't make it tonight. They need someone to take her place, and it pays well." Sophia bit her lower lip, already calculating in her head. "You sure? I mean, how much are we talking about? I really need the money. I'm out of rice, behind on rent, bills piling up." Rebecca didn't hesitate. 10 grand for just 2 hours. Sophia sat up straighter, her breath catching. "Wait, 10 grand for 2 hours?" She let out a disbelieving chuckle. "That sounds way too good to turn down. I need the money, or I'll be sleeping on the streets." "Perfect," Rebecca said, excitement lacing her voice. "Swing by my place before 5. I need to brief you, get you in costume, and do your makeup. Don't be late, okay?" "Got it," Sophia replied before hanging up. She stared at the ceiling for a moment, letting it sink in. A 2-hour gig for $10,000. Either this was a golden opportunity or a disaster waiting to happen. But at this point, she didn't have the luxury of doubt. Her full name was Sophia Marie Parker, a name she hadn't used freely in a long time. She was a runaway, constantly moving, never staying in one place for too long. Home had never been a safe haven. It had been a cage, one her parents tried to lock her in permanently. Their entire lives revolved around business, profits, expansions, and strategic alliances. And for them, marriage was just another business transaction. Her older sister had already suffered that fate, forced to marry a man in his 60s while leaving behind the love of her life. Sophia refused to follow in her footsteps. She had no intention of becoming another pawn in her parents' empire, so she ran. For over a year, she had drifted from one apartment to another, changing names as easily as changing clothes. Her mother's people were relentless, always searching, always hunting. There had been close calls, like the time someone casually asked for her name, and in a panic, she blurted out the first one she saw, which happened to be engraved on a headstone at a funeral parlor. The horror of realizing that the man she was talking to actually knew the deceased was something she'd never lived down. Here, at Mrs. Jessica's place, she had reverted to Sophia. A simple name, familiar, yet distant enough to keep her safe, to survive. She worked nights as a waitress in a bar, scraping together just enough to keep going. But sometimes, when money got too tight, she took on a different kind of gig, one that required her to stay completely still, human statues. Rebecca had introduced her to the job months ago, and it turned out to be a strange but oddly fitting line of work. Sophia had spent so much time hiding, staying motionless, blending into the background that becoming a living statue wasn't much of a stretch. One time, Rebecca had even painted her entire body gold, transforming her into a gleaming metallic sculpture for an upscale event. And now another gig had fallen into her lap, one that paid far more than usual. She just hoped it wasn't too good to be true. "You're a mermaid at this party," Rebecca had instructed, her tone both excited and insistent. She handed Sophia the shimmering mermaid tail, followed by a tray of golden body paint. From head to toe, "You're going to shine. Hair, face, arms, everything." The job was simple. Sophia would perch on a faux rock beside a fountain, motionless, an illusion of art brought to life. For 2 hours, she had to maintain the act, exuding both elegance and mystery. "Don't worry," Rebecca had assured her. "You can shift positions every now and then, just not too much. This is a high-paying gig, way bigger than our usual 3- or 4-digit deals." Sophia had hesitated, tapping her fingers against her arm. 2 hours without really moving? That's a long time. Rebecca had rolled her eyes, nudging her playfully. "Oh, come on, don't act like you never passed 2nd grade. You'll get small breaks, and you can change poses. This is a major event, so put on your best performance. Think about your rent." That last part had sealed it. They arrived at the grand venue in Rebecca's van, and the moment they stepped out, a staff member ushered Sophia toward her designated spot. "Right here, ma'am," the staffer said, gesturing toward the fountain. Sophia took in her surroundings. This wasn't just any party. It was an elite anniversary celebration. The atmosphere radiated luxury, from the carefully arranged candlelit tables to the massive LED screen displaying a slideshow of the host's achievement. A plush red carpet stretched across the floor, welcoming guests dressed in designer attire. Among them were celebrities, models, business tycoons, and politicians, people whose pockets ran deeper than Sophia could fathom. She took her position on the fountain's edge, draping herself over the artificial rock with practiced ease. Her golden painted arm rested elegantly, her lips slightly parted, her gaze fixed in an ethereal stillness. She slowed her breathing, making it as imperceptible as possible. For a while, no one paid her much attention. Guests arrived, greeted each other, sipped champagne, and admired the decor. Then, finally, a group of 3 young men approached. They were strikingly handsome. "Wow," murmured one with soft bangs and a deep dimple. His eyes roamed over Sophia's form. "That's an incredible statue. A golden mermaid. Did the Jimenez family commission this for the party? It must have cost a fortune," added another, his dark hair tousled in an effortless way. "If this were a real woman, she'd be stunning." Sophia resisted the urge to smirk. No one had told them she wasn't actually a statue. The third man, taller, quieter, stepped closer, his gaze locked onto her. Unlike his friends, he didn't immediately speak, nor did he glance away. His sharp eyes studied her face, his expression unreadable. "Alexander, let's go," the messy-haired one said, nudging him. "Dinner's about to start." "Go ahead," Alexander replied smoothly, his attention still fixed on Sophia. "I just want to take a closer look." His friends exchanged amused glances, stifling chuckles. Sophia remained perfectly still, But inwardly, she braced herself. Something about the way Alexander watched her felt different. "Oh, are you that mesmerized by the statue?" one of the young men teased, nudging Alexander with a playful smirk. "Maybe ask your grandpa if he can buy it for you. Bet it's worth a fortune." "Or maybe," the other chimed in, a mischievous glint in his eye, "you're getting a little too into this hunk of metal. Should we be worried about any reactions?" Laughter erupted between them, echoing through the grand hall. They didn't wait for Alexander's response, walking off with grins, leaving him behind, still rooted in place, still staring. Sophia resisted the urge to shift, to smirk, to roll her eyes. 5 minutes had passed. He'd leave soon. Most people did, but instead he stepped closer. A chill prickled down her spine. She fought the impulse to move, to blink, to break character. But something about his gaze unsettled her. An intensity. A curiosity that lingered longer than it should have. Then, before she could react, before she could even brace herself, he leaned in and kissed her. Her world snapped into motion. Her pulse skyrocketed. Her breath caught in her throat. From the corner of her eye, she saw Rebecca freeze, her jaw dropping in horror. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. For a fraction of a second, she was too stunned to move. Then instinct took over. With every ounce of force, she shoved him backward, her palm colliding against his cheek in a sharp, resounding slap. "You sick creep," she shouted, wiping her mouth furiously with the back of her hand. Alexander staggered slightly, his hand flying to his face, his eyes blown wide in shock. Around them, guests murmured, scandalized whispers filling the air. No one had expected the statue to come to life, least of all the man who had kissed her. "What the—" he stammered, clearly as stunned as she was. Before he could say more, Rebecca rushed in, her face a mask of forced composure. Several event staff followed closely behind. "Sir, please," Rebecca said quickly, bowing in apology. "We are so sorry if our human statue startled you." She must have, panicked. "We sincerely apologize." Rebecca shot Sophia a warning look, subtly signaling her to do the same, to apologize, to smooth things over. But Sophia wasn't about to back down. "I'm not apologizing to that pervert," she snapped, still seething. "He just kissed me out of nowhere, and that was my first kiss." The crowd's whispers intensified. The event hadn't even officially started, and already it was descending into chaos. Then, just as Sophia prepared to unleash another furious outburst, something, or rather someone, caught her attention. A familiar figure. Her heart lurched. At the entrance of the venue, standing tall in an elegant gown, was her mother. Sophia's breath hitched. "Mom?" she whispered, her blood running cold. "What is she doing here?" As if sensing the weight of her gaze, her mother's eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment, her mother's face, usually so composed, so unreadable, registered the one thing Sophia had never expected to see: complete and utter shock. "Sophia Marie!" "Parker!" The sharp cry of her name sliced through the air like a whip. Heads turned. Conversations halted. Even the man she had slapped seemed taken aback, his expression shifting from shock to curiosity. Sophia's blood ran cold. Her mother had found her. Panic surged through her veins. This was the 5th time she had been tracked down, and she knew exactly what would happen if they caught her. She'd be dragged back home, locked away, and paraded in front of some wealthy businessman like a prized possession, her fate sealed in an arranged marriage to expand the family's empire. Not this time, not ever. Rebecca's voice rang out, but Sophia was already moving. Without hesitation, she yanked off the mermaid tail, leaving herself clad in only the shimmering gold bra and matching panties. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but she didn't care. Dignity was a small price to pay for freedom. Then she ran. "Oh my God, stop her!" Her mother's horrified shriek echoed through the grand hall. "She's only in her underwear." The scene erupted into chaos. Guests whispered behind manicured hands. Some pointed, some gawked, but Sophia didn't look back. "Lord, how did this happen?" her mother wailed, her voice a mixture of anger and despair. "We travel all this way to the Jimenez estate for one night, and of course, she shows up. Find her!" The suited men surrounding her mother, her father's enforcers, immediately sprang into action. Sophia sprinted through the corridors, her bare feet slapping against the marble floor. The chill of the night air hit her skin as she wove through the estate's sprawling grounds, her heart hammering against her ribs. Up ahead, 2 security guards spotted her and moved to block her escape. No time to stop. She bent down mid-stride, snatching a handful of decorative pebbles from the garden path. With a flick of her wrist, she hurled them toward the guards. "Hey, what the—" One flinched, raising an arm to shield his face. The other stumbled just enough for Sophia to dart past them, slipping into the shadows before they could react. She kept running, lungs burning, eyes scanning for a hiding spot. Then, a dumpster, a massive, industrial-sized bin, still full. The stench hit her immediately. Rotting food, wet cardboard, something sour and unidentifiable. "Ugh, disgusting," she muttered, gagging, but it was her only chance. She climbed in, sinking down into the filth, trying not to breathe too deeply. Footsteps thundered nearby. "Where is she?" a gruff male voice demanded. "Damn, she's fast," another grumbled. "Like a freaking train when she runs." Sophia held her breath. Then, her mother's voice. "Did you find her yet? Keep searching." The men fanned out. Heavy boots scuffed against the pavement, growing fainter as they moved farther away. Sophia squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to stay still. The putrid air made her stomach churn, but she couldn't move. Not until she was sure they were gone. Not until she knew she was safe. Sophia held her breath, sinking deeper into the filth, waiting. The distant murmurs of her pursuers stretched time unbearably thin. Her heart pounded in her ears as she remained as still as death, listening, waiting, until finally the voices faded into silence. She dared to move. Cautiously, she peeked over the rim of the dumpster, scanning the area. The estate's grand entrance loomed in the distance, now eerily quiet. The night air was crisp against her skin, cooling the streaks of sweat on her temple. Slowly, she climbed out, landing on shaky legs. Garbage clung to her, the once flawless gold paint now cracked and peeling in patches. She smelled awful, a vile cocktail of spoiled food, damp paper, and something decidedly worse. "Great," she muttered, wrinkling her nose. "I smell like a landfill, I'm stranded, and my mother's goons are still crawling around. Perfect." She glanced around in frustration. The estate was isolated, tucked away on a sprawling private property. No cabs, no buses, no chance of blending into a crowd. What the hell do I do now? Her mind raced as she paced in the dim glow of the streetlights, trying to come up with an escape plan before her mother's men circled back. Then a car approached. Not just any car, a sleek, black luxury sedan glided toward her, its headlights cutting through the dark. Sophia's muscles coiled, ready to run. But before she could bolt, the tinted window slid down. And there he was, the man who had stolen her first kiss. Sophia's stomach twisted with fury. Of all people, she seethed internally. He leaned casually against the headrest, one hand draped over the steering wheel, as if he hadn't just committed the crime of the century an hour ago. "Need a ride?" he asked smoothly, his voice low and taunting. Sophia's glare could have set the car on fire. "Why on earth would I get in your car?" she snapped. "After what you did? If I weren't running for my life, I'd be filing a complaint against you right now." A smirk curled at the corner of his lips. "Your mother is out here looking for you, Miss Parker." She stiffened. You know my mother?" He tilted his head slightly. "Sort of," he admitted. "She's never mentioned how her runaway daughter ended up painted gold, though. That part was new." Sophia's fists clenched. "Stop playing games. I'm not going anywhere with you." She turned on her heel and stalked away, refusing to acknowledge him any further. He let out a lazy sigh and rolled up the window. "Suit yourself. Good night, then." She barely had time to curse him in her head before movement caught her eye. 2 men in dark suits emerging from the shadows. Her mother's men. They hadn't given up. Her breath hitched. She looked back at the man in the car, then at the approaching enforcers. Damn it. She had no choice. Not if she wanted to remain free. Sophia darted back to the passenger window, her breath coming fast and shallow. "Please," she whispered urgently, "let me in." The man inside remained maddeningly calm, his fingers tapping lightly against the steering wheel. "I thought you said you'd never ride with me." She shifted anxiously from foot to foot, casting frantic glances over her shoulder. "I changed my mind. Hurry up, before they see me." For a moment she thought he would relent. Instead, the window rolled up with an infuriating click. Then, he pulled the car forward, slowly as if taunting her. Sophia's stomach twisted. "You jerk," she wanted to scream. Panic surged through her veins as she spotted her mother's men scanning the area, their sharp gazes sweeping the shadows. She barely had time to react. She dove behind a lamppost, pressing herself flat against it, her heart hammering. Seconds stretched into eternity. Finally, after what felt like forever, the men moved on, but the car was gone, and she was alone. For the rest of the night, Sophia slinked through alleys and back streets like a fugitive, still dressed in nothing but her gold-streaked bra and panties. Her body ached, exhaustion gnawed at her bones, and shame burned hot on her skin. By dawn, her luck shifted, if only slightly. She stumbled upon a quiet yard where clothes had been left to dry. A worn t-shirt and a pair of loose sweatpants hung within reach. She hesitated, then snatched them. She slipped into the borrowed clothes, not caring how baggy or faded they were. They were warm, they were safe, and then, at last, she made her way back to Mrs. Jessica's apartment. For days, she fumed. She fumed at the man in the car. She fumed at her mother's relentless pursuit. She fumed at herself for trusting anyone even slightly. Then, through Rebecca, she finally learned his name, Alexander Grandson of the Jimenez family, the very hosts of the party that had turned into her personal disaster. Her stomach twisted at the thought. She had slapped a VIP note. Wonder her payment got slashed? Rebecca still handed over her cut, but it was nowhere near the 5-digit sum they had promised. The event had imploded before it even truly began, and Sophia had been at the center of the wreckage. Still, it was enough. Enough to cover 2 months' rent, enough to let her pack her things and move again. It was too dangerous to stay. Her mother's people would eventually sniff her out, just as they always did, but relocating wasn't as easy as before. With barely a dime left after paying Mrs. Jessica, she had nowhere to go. Days blurred together in a haze of hunger and exhaustion. Eventually, she found herself slumped on a cold sidewalk, next to a homeless man rummaging through a torn paper bag, pulling out scraps of stale bread. For the first time, the weight of her choices settled heavily on her chest. She had run away from wealth, from a life of comfort and privilege, from control, but now, stripped of everything, she realized just how fragile freedom could be. Still, she would rather live as a beggar than return to her mother's house, only to be forced into marriage. "Spare change?" a hoarse voice rasped beside her. Sophia turned to see the homeless man she had been sitting next to, his weathered hand outstretched in quiet hope. She let out a soft, tired sigh. "Sorry," she murmured, managing a weak smile. "I'm about as broke as you. I don't even have a place to stay." At that, he scooted away slightly, disappointment flickering across his face. Guilt gnawed at her. She hesitated, reaching into her pocket for the last few coins she had left, then froze. A sleek, familiar luxury car had just pulled up in front of a nearby coffee shop. Her spine stiffened. No way. She knew that car. Her pulse ticked faster as she watched the driver's side door open, and then there he was, Alexander, the same man who had stolen her first kiss, the same man who had smirked at her distress, the same man who had driven away that night while she was left running for her life. Her fingers clenched into fists. "Why is he here?" she muttered, narrowing her eyes. "This is too far from the old neighborhood." 2 weeks had passed since that disastrous night, yet the memory of him was still burned into her mind. Her anger simmered, then boiled. Her gaze flickered toward his pristine, expensive car. "You owe me," she whispered. She needed an outlet for the fury bubbling inside her, and suddenly, she knew exactly what to do. She slipped into a corner store nearby and spent her very last money on a can of spray paint. By the time she returned, his car was still parked there. The street was quiet. A slow, wicked smile curled her lips. She popped the cap off the can, gave it a firm shake, and pervert, with bold, sweeping strokes, she painted pervert in huge, unmistakable letters across the hood. Then the doors, then, just for good measure, she scrawled it across the windows, too. "That's what you are," she muttered under her breath. "You ruined my job, stole my first kiss, and then had the nerve to leave me behind." With each letter, her satisfaction grew. By the time she stepped back to admire her work, the expensive car was completely defaced. "There," she said with smug finality, "now everyone will know what you are." She was just about to turn and leave when a furious voice roared behind her. "What the hell?" Her heart leaped into her throat. She spun around, eyes wide, just as Alexander stormed toward her, his expression livid. She barely had time to react, her body moved on instinct. In a panicked flurry, she lifted the can and sprayed him. Right in the face! A strangled, startled curse tore from his lips as he stumbled back, dropping the steaming cup of coffee he had been carrying. Hot liquid splashed onto the pavement. His hands flew up, swiping at the paint streaking across his skin. "Get back here!" he bellowed, blinking furiously, but Sophia was already sprinting away. "Serves you right, perv," she shouted over her shoulder, and then she ran like hell. Just as she was about to take off, something caught her ankle. A foot? Sophia barely had time to react before she was sent sprawling forward. The pavement met her hard, the impact rattling her bones. "What the?" Her spray paint can clattered away, rolling out of reach. Dazed, she turned her head, only to see the homeless man from earlier pulling his leg back, grinning smugly. "Traitor!" she gasped, but she had no time to yell at him, because when she looked up again, Alexander was standing over her. His face was a mask of fury. Sophia's stomach twisted. Ahead she could scramble up, a strong hand grabbed her arm. With little effort, he hauled her to her feet and shoved her toward his vandalized car. "Ow!" she hissed, trying to yank free. "You jerk, let go of me!" He didn't. Instead, his grip tightened as he leaned in, his voice low and ice-cold. "You just vandalized my car," he said. "A car worth millions?" She wrenched her arm again, but had no luck. Fuming, she snapped, "Oh yeah? And what about my first kiss that you stole? Is that priceless enough for you?" At that, his jaw flexed for the briefest moment. Something flickered in his eyes, something unreadable, but then his expression turned to stone. Out another word, he pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. "Lucky for me," he murmured, "I have someone to call. Someone named Olivia Parker." Sophia's blood ran cold. Her mother. He knew, she felt the air shift, the walls of her freedom closing in fast. "I might just let her know where you are," he continued smoothly. "Let her come pick you up. Problem solved." Her heart pounded. No. Her mother's people found her now. It would be over. She would be dragged back home, locked away, forced into a marriage she couldn't escape. Her breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. "Wait," she burst out. "Don't do that, please." He watched her struggle, unimpressed. Desperation clawed at her throat. "I'll do anything," she said hurriedly. "I'll clean your car. I'll wash off the spray paint, okay? Just, please, don't call her." His gaze sharpened, analyzing her. For a long, agonizing moment he said nothing. Then, finally, "Why are you so desperate to keep running?" he asked. "You had everything, money, comfort, security. Don't you want a stable life instead of living on the streets?" Sophia let out a trembling breath, her hands balled into fists. "I'd rather be free and homeless than forced to marry someone I don't love just to make my family richer." A flicker of surprise passed through his eyes. Slowly, he lowered his phone. Sophia exhaled shakily. "Fine," he said at last. "I won't call her." Relief crashed into her, but then his gaze darkened again. "But," he added, "there's a condition." Sophia swallowed hard. "Anything," she said quickly. "Just don't turn me in." Alexander exhaled, then met her gaze. "Move in with me." Sophia stiffened. "What?" "You'll stay in my condo," he repeated, his tone even. "You want to hide? Then hide there. But in exchange, you'll keep it clean. Cook for me, too." Her brows furrowed. "So? You're making me your maid?" "Think of it as punishment for vandalizing my car." His lips quirked slightly. "And a fair trade. I'll forget about the fiasco at that party." Sophia hesitated. She didn't trust him, but she had nowhere else to go. If she refused, she'd be back on the streets, or worse, found by her mother. Her stomach twisted at the thought. Biting her lip, she muttered, "Fine." Alexander gave a satisfied nod. "Good, let's go." Still wary, she followed him. His condo was spacious, sleek, unbelievably modern, the kind of place that reeked of money. Glass walls framed the glittering skyline, and stylish furniture filled the open space. Everything, from the polished marble counters to the state-of-the-art appliances, screamed luxury. Sophia swallowed hard. The difference between this and the streets she had just been on was almost laughable. Alexander motioned around. "Make yourself at home." She let out a slow breath and nodded. Then, he turned to her and extended his hand. "Alexander Jimenez. That's my name." She eyed his outstretched palm, debating whether or not to shake it. After a pause, she finally did. "Sophia," she said, her grip brief before she pulled away. Alexander didn't seem offended. Instead, he gestured toward the living area. "You can sit. I'll cook us lunch." She blinked. "You cook?" "Obviously." He moved toward the kitchen, rolling up his sleeves. Sophia, still wary, wandered onto the balcony. She regretted it instantly. They were on the 23rd floor. The sheer height made her stomach lurch. She quickly stepped back inside. From the sofa, she watched as Alexander worked in the kitchen, effortlessly chopping vegetables. His movements were precise, controlled, just like everything else about him. She should have been thinking about escape, about her next move, but instead she picked up a magazine from the coffee table, flipping through it absent-mindedly. At least for now, she was safe. For now, Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Olivia Parker. His gaze flickered toward Sophia, who was still flipping through the magazine, completely unaware. Silently, he slipped into his bedroom and shut the door before answering. "Hello, Mrs. Parker," he said smoothly. "Alexander, thank goodness." Olivia's voice rushed through the receiver, a mix of relief and urgency. "Any news? Did you find her?" He hesitated for a brief second, then calmly, "Yes." A sharp inhale crackled through the line. "Oh my God, you did? Finally, after all this time?" Her excitement was palpable. "Thank you, Alexander. I'll come pick her up right away. Just tell me where you are." "Don't worry, I'll make it worth your while." Alexander's lips curled into a slow, deliberate grin. "I'm not telling you where she is." Silence, then, "What?" Her voice was tight, edged with disbelief. "Alexander, what are you talking about?" His fingers drummed lazily against the dresser. "You asked me to find her," he said evenly, "but I never agreed to hand her over." A sharp pause. "What is the meaning of this?" Olivia's confusion was now laced with suspicion. Alexander exhaled as if amused. "I want to get to know her." Another beat of silence. "You've already arranged for her to marry my older brother Dominic, haven't you?" He let the question hang in the air before adding, "Well, that's too bad. I want her for myself." The breath Olivia had been holding finally released. This time, in a sharp, horrified gasp. "Alexander, you can't—" "Goodbye, Mrs. Parker." He ended the call before she could finish. A second later, the phone vibrated again. He let it ring, and ring, and ring, until it finally stopped. Dominic had stolen Alexander's former fiancée, Amanda. She hadn't just left Alexander, she had betrayed him. She had sought comfort in his brother's arms, deceiving him while pretending to love him. The memory of that humiliation still burned in his mind, a wound that had never quite healed. And now, Dominic was set to marry Sophia. For business. For power. Alexander wasn't about to let that happen. He powered off his phone, cutting off Olivia before she could try calling again. Then, exhaling slowly, he made his way back to the living room, only to stop in his tracks. Sophia was sprawled out on the floor, fast asleep. One arm dangled over her stomach, her chest rising and falling in deep, steady breaths. A soft snore escaped her lips, and was she drooling? Alexander let out an amused scoff. She must be exhausted. For a second he debated waking her up. He crouched beside her and gave her shoulder a light shake. Nothing. She just let out a mumbling snore and curled up tighter. At a moment's hesitation, he slipped his arms beneath her and lifted her effortlessly, carrying her bridal style toward his bedroom. She barely stirred, her weight light in his arms. When he reached the bed, he gently laid her down and pulled a blanket over her. She didn't react. She was out cold. Alexander stood there for a moment, watching her sleep, something inexplicable flickering in his chest. Then, shaking off the thought, he turned and walked out, heading back to the kitchen to finish cooking. When Sophia woke hours later, confusion hit her first. She sat up, blinking at the unfamiliar room. Panic prickled at her skin. Where was she? Then her brain caught up. Alexander, she stiffened, glancing down at herself. She was still in her clothes. Nothing seemed out of place. Her heartbeat slowed a fraction. Her gaze landed on a few paper shopping bags beside the bed. Inside were neatly folded clothes. Simple, yet stylish, as if chosen with care. A note sat on top. "These are for you. A peace offering. Wear whatever you like, but don't go outside." Sophia stared at it. A peace offering? She wasn't sure what to make of that. She glanced around the condo, but there was no sign of Alexander. Days passed, then a week. She kept herself busy cleaning, cooking, and most importantly, taking full advantage of the free Wi-Fi, Netflix, YouTube. More Netflix. It was, oddly enough, the most relaxed she'd been in a long time. And Alexander? He was hardly ever around. True to his word, he didn't turn her in. He didn't bother her. He didn't even seem to care that she was here at all. By the time he finally reappeared, after 2 whole weeks, it wasn't for conversation. He just stepped inside, grabbed something from the counter, and left again, without so much as a glance in her direction. And just like that, he was gone. Again, despite Alexander's strange behavior, Sophia found herself growing more at ease. He was unpredictable, but he kept his word. Maybe, just maybe, he truly meant to let her stay without calling her mother. It was the closest thing to stability she had in a while. Then, one lazy afternoon, while she lounged on the couch watching TV, her phone buzzed. A message from Rebecca. "Got another statue gig if you're interested. We're short 1 person tonight. You in?" Sophia frowned. A statue gig at a bar? She hesitated before typing her reply. Isn't that basically the same trouble as before? Rebecca's response came almost instantly. Not as a text, but as a call. Sophia sighed and picked up. "It's a clean, legitimate bar," Rebecca said quickly before she could protest. "No weird stuff, I swear. Just 5 of you as human statues for a few hours, that's it." Sophia chewed her lip, doubt gnawing at her. "I don't want a repeat of what happened last time," she said. "My mom was there, Rebecca. You saw the chaos that caused," Rebecca finished for her. "I know, and I get it, but this is my last request, okay? After this, I'll help you leave town." Sophia sat up a little straighter. "Leave?" "Yes," Rebecca said. "I'll buy your bus ticket. You said you wanted to go far away, right? Well, I know a place, a quiet island where nobody will find you. My grandma's hometown. You can come with me after the gig." Sophia's pulse quickened. Freedom, real freedom. She had been living at Alexander's condo, but she was still hiding, still trapped in limbo. This was a way out. "Really?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Really," Rebecca assured her. "You've become a friend, Sophia, and I do want to help. I'm heading home after this job anyway, so you can just come with me?" Sophia sat in silence for a few moments, weighing her options. Then she took a deep breath. "All right, fine. Text me the address and I'll be there." Rebecca squealed in excitement. "Yes! Don't worry, the ticket's on me. I'll see you soon." The call ended. Sophia exhaled, gripping her phone tightly. This was it. Her chance to disappear for good. Sophia clutched her phone, her mind racing. Staying at Alexander's condo had given her a temporary refuge, but she couldn't rely on him forever. He was unpredictable. One moment he was distant, the next he was oddly protective. She couldn't afford to grow comfortable. True freedom lay somewhere far away, far from her mother, far from any forced marriage, far from a life she had no control over. She took a final glance around the sleek apartment. This wasn't her home. It was just another cage. Alexander had been generous enough to let her stay, but no matter how luxurious the surroundings were, she still felt trapped. The looming threat of being found, by her mother, by her past, hung over her like a storm cloud. She had to leave. And so she did. At 4 p.m. she slipped out of the condo, her footsteps light, her heart pounding. She left behind only a brief note of thanks, though she doubted it would mean much to Alexander. He had told her not to go outside. He had given her a safe place to hide. But hiding wasn't living. Wrapping herself in an old jacket, she pulled a cap low over her face and secured a mask over her nose and mouth. The weather was mild, but she needed the disguise. Every precaution counted. When she arrived at the address Rebecca had sent, she found the others already preparing, their faces and bodies covered in shimmering gold paint. The setup made sense now. According to Rebecca, the bar was hosting a competition that night, and their job was to pose as living trophies, symbols of victory for the winners. Not actual prizes to be taken home, just decorative figures to pose with for the cameras. Sophia watched as the makeup artists applied the finishing touches on the other performers. Rebecca spotted her and broke into a grin. "I'm glad you made it," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. "Honestly, I thought you'd sworn off human statue gigs after what happened last time." Sophia folded her arms. "I need the money," she said bluntly. "And you promised you'd help me. You said you'd take me to your hometown, someplace safe. I'm holding you to that." Rebecca's expression softened. "I will," she promised. "I told you, I want to help. Now, come sit down. Let them do your makeup." Sophia hesitated. A flicker of guilt twisted in her stomach. She had snuck out against Alexander's wishes. Would he be angry enough to report her? Would he call her mother, tell her where to find her? She forced the thought aside. There was no turning back now. For tonight she had one job to do. She would focus on that, and then, if all went well, she would finally be free. When they arrived, Sophia immediately noticed the difference. This was nothing like the dingy, smoke-filled bars she used to work at. The place exuded an air of sophistication. Warm lighting, polished floors, and neatly dressed patrons sipping expensive cocktails. Even the music was soft and tasteful, a far cry from the chaotic, dimly lit venues she had once endured. "So, these are your talents?" The bar manager, a well-dressed woman with a sharp gaze, studied them with interest. "Yes, ma'am," Rebecca answered, standing tall. The manager circled them, her eyes scanning their metallic painted forms. "Impressive," she murmured. "If they stay absolutely still, they'll look just like real statues. The makeup and costumes are flawless. I'm glad I hired you, Rebecca." She gestured toward a small elevated stage where their performance would take place. Unlike Sophia's previous gig, where guests had been unaware the statues were real, tonight's audience already knew what to expect. Excitement buzzed through the crowd as they anticipated the living art in action. Sophia's entire body was painted silver, embodying the concept of a second-place trophy. Every 5 minutes, she and the others shifted into a new pose, their movements synchronized, their expressions frozen in statuesque grace. Each transition was met with cheers and fascinated whispers. Then, as Sophia adjusted into her final pose, something made her blood run cold. From the back of the room, seated on an elegant couch, a man watched her. His posture was relaxed, a drink in one hand, but his expression was unreadable, serious, calculating. A woman beside him leaned in, murmuring something, but he paid her no attention. His focus was locked solely on Sophia. Her breath hitched. "Alexander, no. No, no." Her eyes widened in shock, but she quickly snapped back into her performance, forcing herself to hold her stance. Had he already called her mother? Was she moments away from being dragged back to the life she had fought so hard to escape? "This is bad," she thought, pulse hammering in her ears. "Sophia, get ready! Time for your last pose!" Rebecca's voice cut through her panic. Swallowing hard, Sophia forced herself to comply, lifting her arm into position. But she could still feel Alexander's stare, burning into her, silent and unforgiving. When their set finally ended, Rebecca announced a break. Sophia wasted no time. She rushed over to Rebecca, grabbing her arm. "Rebecca," she whispered urgently, her heart pounding. "I think I need—" "Go take a break first," Rebecca said, waving Sophia off. "At 9, you'll all officially become human trophies for the winners." Sophia swallowed hard. "Rebecca, But before she could finish, a familiar voice sent a chill down her spine. "Sophia?" She froze. Rebecca turned as well, her expression shifting to nervous recognition. Monsieur West," she stammered. "Good evening." Alexander didn't spare Rebecca a glance. His sharp gaze was locked on Sophia as he reached for her arm. "Let's go home," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sophia's pulse spiked. She wrenched her arm free. "I don't want to," she shot back. "I'm in the middle of a gig. I need to earn money, remember?" Alexander's jaw tensed, his gaze sweeping over her. "And what exactly is this outfit you're wearing?" he asked coolly. Sophia stiffened under his scrutiny, but held her ground. Excuse me, Mr. West," Rebecca cut in hesitantly. "She's free to go, isn't she?" Alexander finally turned to Rebecca. "I'll pay you," he said flatly. "She's coming with me now." Sophia's eyes widened. "What?" she breathed, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. Alexander's lips curled into a faint, knowing smirk. Rebecca hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Sure, Mr. West," she said quickly. "She can leave." She turned to Sophia. "Sophia, it's all right." Sophia's stomach twisted. "Why are you just letting him decide for me?" she demanded. But before she could protest further, Alexander took her wrist in a firm grip and led her toward the exit. Panic flared in her chest. He didn't speak, didn't explain. His silence was more unnerving than anger, and that terrified her. "I'm sorry, okay?" Sophia tried to explain as they walked through the dimly lit parking lot. "I just don't want to be stuck in your condo with nothing to do. I need something, some income, some independence." Alexander didn't respond immediately. He led her past a row of sleek cars before finally stopping. Releasing her arm, he turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "All right," he said at last, his voice calm yet unwavering. "I'll take a leave from work so I can stay at the condo with you. That way, you won't be alone." Her eyes widened in shock. "What?" she blurted. "Why would you do that? I'm just a stranger to you. You can't just ignore your own job for this. You said you didn't want to be alone," he pointed out smoothly. Her pulse quickened. "You really don't have to do that," she said, shaking her head. Why not?" he asked, stepping closer. Sophia swallowed hard. Because I'm nobody to you." A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes before he gently took her hand. "Do you want to be somebody to me?" Her breath hitched. She searched his face, half expecting to find amusement, a smirk, anything that suggested he was teasing her, but he was completely serious. Before she could find the words to respond, a voice interrupted. "Alexander?" They both turned. A stunning woman approached them, her designer heels clicking against the pavement. Sophia immediately recognized her. It was the same woman she'd seen with Alexander inside the bar earlier. The woman's gaze flicked to their hands, and Sophia instinctively pulled away, not wanting to fuel any misunderstandings. "Margot," Alexander greeted, his tone noticeably cooler now. Margot's lips parted slightly before she gathered herself. "Could I talk to you, please?" she asked, her voice almost pleading. Alexander exhaled through his nose, then turned to Sophia. "Just a moment." Sophia met his gaze, her heart still unsettled. Go ahead and talk to her," Sophia said hesitantly, shifting on her feet. Alexander glanced at her, then back at Margot, who looked like she was on the verge of tears. "I'm sorry, Margot," he said, his voice even, "but I'm talking to my girlfriend right now." Margot's jaw dropped. Sophia blinked, startled. Girlfriend? She wasn't naive. Alexander was clearly using her to avoid Margot. Still, something about the way he said it made her stomach twist. Margot turned to Sophia with pleading eyes. "Miss, can I speak to my ex-fiancé alone?" she asked softly. "You don't have to be jealous. We're only going to talk, I promise." Sophia parted her lips to respond, but Alexander cut in before she could. "If you have something to say it here," he said coldly. Margot inhaled sharply as if bracing herself. "I want you back, Alexander," she admitted. "I still love you. I never stopped loving you. Please, let's go back to how we were." Sophia shifted uncomfortably, unsure if she was meant to be here for this. Alexander's grip on her hand tightened. "I understand I made mistakes," Margot rushed on. "But Dominic and I just happened by accident. I was drunk, and I thought he was you, and then we—" "Whatever the reason," Alexander interrupted icily, "it doesn't change the fact that you cheated." Margot flinched. Then, with deliberate slowness, Alexander lifted his and Sophia's entwined hands. "I have a girlfriend now, Margot." Margot's composure crumbled. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she let out a trembling breath. "But if this is how it is," she whispered, her voice breaking, "then why not marry my ex-lover? Your brother? Dominic's new fiancée ran away before he could even meet her, didn't she?" Sophia's entire body went rigid. Her heart pounded violently. That sounded familiar. Alexander turned to her. His expression was unreadable. "Let's go," he said quietly. Without another word, they left, leaving Margot standing in the parking lot, tears streaking her face. A flood of questions stormed through Sophia's mind, each one colliding with the next. Margot's revelation had shaken something loose inside her, a truth she felt she already knew but hadn't dared to face. If she didn't ask Alexander now, the uncertainty would haunt her. "Alexander," she said, breaking the heavy silence as he drove, "do you have a brother?" His hands remained steady on the wheel. Yes, he replied. His name is Dominic. Her pulse quickened. Did his fiancée run away before they could meet? She pressed, even though she suspected the answer. Yes, he said again. She swallowed hard. The next question felt like a weight on her tongue. Was that me? Alexander didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowed the car and pulled over to the side of the street. When he turned to face her, his expression was unreadable. Calm, yet piercingly serious. Yes, Sophia, he finally said. That girl was you. The breath left her lungs. A cold sensation washed over her as the realization settled. So you only let me stay in your condo to hand me back to him? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against her cheek. His touch was warm, reassuring. You said you didn't want to marry him, right? I don't, she admitted, her throat tight. Then I won't return you to him, he declared. His hand drifted to her chin, tilting her face toward his. The intensity in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine. Because you belong to me now. Before she could react, he leaned in, claiming her lips in a deep, fervent kiss. Sophia gasped, her eyes fluttering shut as warmth flooded through her. She wasn't experienced in this, but something about the way he kissed, firm, possessive, yet undeniably gentle, made her want to follow his lead. When he finally pulled away, both of them were breathless. You're mine now, Sophia, he murmured, his voice low, determined. I won't let you go back home as long as they're trying to force you into that marriage. I promise you that. Something shifted inside her, a sudden, irreversible change. Now that everything was out in the open, it felt as if she and Alexander had clicked into place, like two pieces of a puzzle she hadn't realized were meant to fit together all along. Alexander confessed that, at first, he had planned to use her against his older brother, Dominic, as payback for Dominic stealing his ex, Margot. But somewhere along the way, everything had changed. Living with Sophia had shifted his focus, turning his desire for revenge into something entirely different. Sophia had never truly experienced love before. She had spent her life running from her mother's control, from an unwanted marriage, from the expectations placed upon her. But with Alexander, something new and powerful was taking hold. After that revelation, they began dating. Really dating. No more hiding in a condo or pretending they weren't drawn to each other. They went out, explored the city together, and learned the little things about each other that turned infatuation into something deeper. Then, one evening, Alexander stepped out of his bedroom and joined her on the couch, his expression casual yet purposeful. Let's take a trip next week, he said, leaning in slightly. I'm taking some leave from work. Want to go? Sophia blinked at him in surprise. You're really going on leave? Why? He scooted closer, his arm resting along the back of the couch behind her. Because we need time away together, he said simply. You hate being stuck inside, don't you? Her cheeks warmed. Yes, I do want to go, she admitted. A teasing glint appeared in his eyes. You've been kissing me whenever you feel like it. You barely let me leave your side. But sure, let's do it. Let's go somewhere. She huffed, shoving his shoulder lightly, but she couldn't stop her smile. He grinned. I've already filed my leave, so we're set to go next week. They decided on Hawaii, trading Chicago's city skyline for the sun-drenched beaches and lush landscapes of paradise. Taking a night flight, Sophia felt a thrill unlike anything she'd known. This was her first time traveling purely for fun. No running, no hiding, just the excitement of adventure, with the man who had unexpectedly become her home. When they landed in Hawaii, the next morning took them straight to the southern part of Oahu for their first real adventure, canyoning and ziplining. Sophia eyed the towering cliffs and rushing waters with a mix of awe and apprehension. Wait, that's what canyoning is? She asked, shifting nervously. Climbing rocks, trekking, jumping into water? I'm not so sure about this. Alexander chuckled, gently taking her hand as their guide strapped them into harnesses. Don't worry, I'm right here, he reassured her. A moment later, the staff secured them into a zip line, face down in a full Superman position. The ground seemed impossibly far beneath them. Sophia's stomach twisted. She whimpered. Alexander, it's so high. Alexander tightened his grip on her hand, his voice steady and reassuring. I'm right beside you. Don't be scared. Look at the view, Sophia. She kept her eyes squeezed shut, her breath shaky. I can't. It's too high. He leaned in slightly. Face your fear, he coaxed gently. With a deep breath, she forced herself to peek down. Wow, she exhaled in awe. Below them stretched an endless sea of lush green trees, rolling hills, and a horizon bathed in golden light. The panoramic beauty was almost overwhelming, breathtaking in a way she had never experienced before. After conquering the zip line, they spent the next 4 hours canyoning, trekking through rugged trails, climbing waterfalls, and leaping into cool, crystal-clear pools. Their cheerful local guides not only led the way but also shared fascinating stories about the island, making the adventure even more special. Despite the physical exhaustion, Sophia had never felt more alive. The days that followed were filled with laughter, exploration, and indulgence in Hawaii's finest delights. They sampled slow-roasted pork at a bustling luau, strolled along pristine beaches, and found hidden scenic spots that felt like their own private paradise. 2 weeks passed in a blur of happiness. On their last night, Alexander planned something unforgettable. They dined at an elegant restaurant in the city, where candlelight flickered against the glass windows overlooking the ocean. Midway through dinner, he stood up, took the microphone from the band, and without hesitation, began to sing for her. Sophia's heart clenched as the restaurant filled with his deep, mesmerizing voice. She wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry when at the end of the song, he walked over and presented her with a bouquet of roses. The entire restaurant erupted in applause, but all she could focus on was him. This man who had somehow turned her world upside down. In her 23 years, she had never allowed herself to fall in love. She had always been too guarded, too wary of attachments. Yet here she was, happier than she had ever been. When they returned to Chicago, their blissful escape didn't end. They carried their carefree vacation spirit into everyday life, filling their days with simple joys. They cooked together, sometimes making a mess of the kitchen, other times surprising themselves with edible masterpieces. They baked at midnight just for the fun of it, feeding each other spoonfuls of frosting. One afternoon, while decorating cupcakes, Sophia grinned at him. "So, what flavor do you want for your birthday cake?" she asked playfully. Alexander smirked. "You," she blinked. "Huh?" Before she could process his words, a bit of frosting landed on his lip. Without breaking eye contact, he licked it away, stepping closer until they were inches apart. His voice dropped to a tender whisper. "I love you, Sophia." Her hands trembled as she set the piping bag aside. Her heart pounded wildly. "Alexander," he cupped her face, his gaze unwavering. "You love me too, right?" She rested her hands on his shoulders, looking deep into his eyes. A slow smile curved her lips. "Yes, I love you." Alexander's gaze flicked to her lips, darkened with intent. "Can I kiss you?" he murmured. Sophia rolled her eyes. "You always kiss me without asking, so why ask now?" His lips curled into a small pout. "Because this time, I want more than just a kiss." His voice dipped lower, sending a shiver down her spine. "Will you let me?" She parted her lips, heart thundering. "You? You mean you want to take out your baby?" He frowned. "Baby?" Her eyes darted nervously to his pants, where a rather obvious bulge strained against the fabric. Heat rushed to her cheeks. I think it's already mad." A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. Alexander lifted her chin so she had no choice but to meet his gaze. "Sophia, it's been mad for a while. More than mad. Eager." Before she could reply, he crushed his lips against hers. A kiss so fervent, it stole the breath from her lungs. His arms wrapped around her as he lifted her onto the kitchen table, the clatter of baking tools nearly drowned by the pounding of her heartbeat. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss until there was nothing but heat between them. She gasped when his hand slid up her thigh, slipping beneath her skirt. A rush of anticipation sent her pulse skyrocketing as his fingers brushed the lace of her underwear. But just as he began tugging at the delicate fabric, the sharp ring of a phone shattered the moment. Sophia flinched. Reality came rushing back as she pushed against his chest, panting. She hopped down from the table, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "Leave it," Alexander growled, his breath still uneven, his grip trying to pull her back. But the persistent ringing gnawed at her, and something told her she needed to answer. "Hello?" she said, struggling to sound normal. A woman's voice drifted through the line, cold and unmistakable. "Open the door, Alexander. I'm outside." Sophia's stomach dropped. Margot! Her gaze snapped to Alexander. What does she want this time? She muttered, irritation lacing her voice. A storm brewed in his dark eyes. Without another word, he snatched the phone from her grasp. Seriously? He bit out before slamming the receiver down. Without hesitation, he strode toward the front door, his frustration evident in every step. Sophia hurried after him, quickly fixing her clothes. The door swung open. Margot stood there, her red lips curved into a forced smile, her eyes unreadable as they flicked between them. Alexander's expression turned to ice. "How did you find this condo?" he demanded, voice sharp and unforgiving. "What do you want?" Margot tilted her head slightly, a knowing smirk playing on her lips. "Well, I'm not the one who wants something," she said smoothly, "but the person I'm with does." Sophia's pulse pounded as a figure emerged from the shadows. A man, tall, refined, and eerily similar to Alexander, yet older. Dominic, but it wasn't him that sent a chill down her spine. Another figure stepped forward. Sophia's breath hitched. Her world tilted. Her worst fear had materialized before her eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Mom?" Olivia burst into the room before anyone could react, wrapping Sophia in a crushing embrace. "My daughter!" Olivia sobbed. "Oh, my daughter! Thank goodness I found you!" Sophia stiffened, struggling to process what was happening. She hadn't expected this. Not here, not now. Dominic scoffed, casting Alexander a condescending look. "I never imagined you'd stoop this low," he sneered. "Stealing my fiancé? You're even more foolish than I thought." Alexander's eyes darkened, a muscle ticking in his jaw. Olivia clutched Sophia's hands, her desperation evident. "Enough, child, let's go home," she insisted. "Stop this nonsense. Why did you run off? Don't you know how much I love you, how much we've searched for you?" Sophia took a step back, shaking her head. "No," she said firmly. "I don't want to go home, Mom. I don't want to marry someone I don't love." Dominic took a step forward, but Alexander immediately positioned himself between them, his stance unyielding. Dominic let out a low chuckle. "So you actually love this guy?" His voice dripped with disbelief. "Sophia, you can't be serious. He's just an illegitimate child. Do you even realize that? He's not an official heir?" he continued, his lips curling into a smirk. "You can't?" "I love Alexander." Sophia's voice rang out, fierce and unwavering. "And I'm glad I ran away, because your personality is revolting." Olivia's expression hardened. "Stop talking like that," she snapped. "You're coming home. Now. Our families have an agreement." Before Sophia could protest, one of Olivia's security men seized her arm. She gasped, struggling against his grip, panic flaring in her chest. "Mom, please," she cried, her voice breaking. "I don't want to marry him." Tears burned her eyes as she fought to break free, but the man's grip was ironclad. Then, suddenly, a forceful hand wrenched her away from the guard. Strong, protective Alexander, his fury was palpable, his entire body brimming with unspoken threats. "If you want to take her," he said, his voice dangerously low, "you'll have to go through me first." "Stop being stubborn," Olivia warned, her voice sharp with authority. "Take one more step, and I'll have them break your boyfriend's legs, understand?" Sophia's blood ran cold. Her eyes darted to Alexander just as a brutal fist connected with his jaw. The sickening crack echoed through the room. Alexander staggered back before crashing to the floor. "Alexander!" Sophia screamed, trying to run to him. But Olivia yanked her back, her grip unrelenting. Dominic stepped forward, his voice chillingly calm. "I'll deal with my foolish brother," he said. "He's the one who kidnapped you after all, locked you up here like some possession. So, let's go." The guards seized her arms, dragging her away. She thrashed, kicking, clawing, desperate to break free. But it was useless. In mere seconds, she was gone. Ripped away from him. After more than a year of hiding, of fighting for her own choices, she was caught. Just when she had finally found love, they tore her away from it. And now, she was trapped in a nightmare she had spent her whole life trying to escape. The wedding was planned swiftly. No expense was spared. A grand cathedral, imported flowers, a designer gown fit for royalty. Everything was perfect except for the bride. Sophia felt none of the excitement, none of the joy a woman was supposed to feel before her wedding. She barely saw Dominic throughout the preparations. He was uninterested, absent. Not that she cared, because the only man she wanted was gone. During a family meeting at the West Mansion, Sophia sat in suffocating silence. Dominic wasn't even there. Aunt Lena, the family matriarch, eyed Olivia carefully. "The wedding is still happening, correct?" Lena asked. "Of course," Olivia replied smoothly. "The union of the Parker and West families will proceed as planned." Lena nodded in approval. "After all, it was part of the agreement with Mrs. West's late mother," she said. "That's right," Olivia agreed. "My mother always insisted that one of her grandsons marry Sophia. It was her final wish." Sophia's chest tightened. She knew that Aunt Lena had helped raise Alexander, even though he had never been formally acknowledged as an heir. But the plan had always been clear. The legitimate grandson, Dominic, was meant to marry her, not Alexander. Nina Alexander, Sophia clenched her fists beneath the table. But what about what she wanted? 3 more weeks passed in a blur of forced preparations, and then the dreaded day arrived. Sophia sat inside a pristine white limousine, the weight of her gown pressing against her like a suffocating embrace. Outside, her watchers stood guard, their presence a silent warning: no escape, no way out. She clenched her hands in her lap, willing herself to be strong. But silent tears betrayed her. They slipped down her cheeks, one after another, because this wasn't just a wedding, it was a funeral, the death of every dream she had dared to hold. And the love she had lost. At the church entrance, staff members rushed to open the car door, their hands extending to help her out. The moment Sophia stepped onto the marble steps, a murmur rippled through the crowd. "She's here! The bride!" someone announced. Aunt Lena turned, her sharp eyes locking onto Sophia before hurrying over with an approving smile. "My dear, you look wonderful, but why the long face?" Sophia said nothing. How could she pretend? Even as Aunt Lena's expression remained warm, Sophia could only glare. If only Alexander would burst through those doors, stopping this farce of a wedding. If only he'd take her hand and run, then without hesitation, she'd flee with him. Forever. "You're so lovely," Aunt Lena cooed, reaching out to adjust the lace sleeve of Sophia's gown. "Just think, soon you'll be part of the family." Sophia turned away, her stomach twisting. Family, but not with the man she wanted. The ceremony was about to begin. Inside the Grand Cathedral, rows of pews were packed with high-profile guests, flashing cameras, and curious onlookers. The air was thick with expectation. Sophia gripped her bouquet so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The flowers were perfect, soft, fragrant, delicate, just like the cage she was about to be locked in. She forced a small, hollow smile for the cameras, though misery pooled deep in her chest. She started down the aisle, each step heavier than the last. She refused to look ahead. She refused to see the man waiting for her at the altar. But she knew he was there. Dominic. The man she was being forced to marry. Her mother leaned in slightly. "Look at your groom, Sophia," Olivia murmured, voice firm. Her pulse pounded in her ears. "If I must, I'll close my eyes," she thought, "because I cannot look at him." She reached the altar, standing frozen before the man who was supposed to be her future. And then, "Take my hand, Sophia." Her breath hitched. That voice, familiar, deep, she knew that voice. Slowly, fearfully, she lifted her gaze, and the world stopped. It wasn't Dominic standing before her. It was Alexander, her vision blurred with tears. Alexander?" she whispered, barely able to speak. She looked toward her mother, then Aunt Lena, who simply smiled and waved. And then, in the front row, her sister grinned and gave her a thumbs up. Sophia blinked, her mind struggling to catch up with reality. She turned back to Alexander, her breath unsteady. How did this happen?" she whispered, eyes wide. "Are you really here?" A slow, knowing smile curved his lips. "Did you want my brother to be the one standing here instead?" he teased. "Of course not," she burst out, her voice trembling with emotions too overwhelming to name. His grip on her hand tightened, warm and steady. "Then take my hand," he said again, his voice a quiet promise. "And let's get married." Her heart clenched. Without hesitation, she placed her trembling fingers in his, Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She couldn't believe it. Just when she thought everything was lost, when she had resigned herself to a future of misery, he had come for her. He had saved her. And now, against all odds, he was hers. The ceremony continued, though Sophia barely registered the words. All she could focus on was Alexander, the man beside her, the man she loved, the man she was now bound to forever. And when it was over, when the final vows had been exchanged, they were no longer just Alexander and Sophia. They were husband and wife. Later, she discovered how he had pulled off the impossible. Alexander had struck a deal with Dominic, offering something valuable in exchange for Sophia, land he had inherited from the West family. But it hadn't been just that. Aunt Lena and Olivia had eventually softened, realizing that what she and Alexander shared was real. Love, not obligation, had won. 1 week after their unexpected wedding, both families gathered for a small, intimate celebration. Even Olivia was present, her sharp edges slightly softened. Dominic, however, had left the country, off to start a new business venture abroad. Sophia sat beside Alexander, their fingers entwined, her heart light for the first time in what felt like forever. Across the table, Aunt Lena sipped her wine before leaning forward with an eager smile. "Are you two ready for your honeymoon abroad?" she asked, eyes twinkling. "Absolutely," Sophia grinned, practically glowing. Aunt Lena chuckled. "Well, don't forget to bring back souvenirs for us." "That goes for me too," Olivia chimed in, winking playfully. "Remember what I asked for, Sophia?" Sophia bit back a smile and nodded. "I won't forget, Aunt Lena." Alexander arched an eyebrow, eyeing them both suspiciously. "What are you two plotting?" Sophia turned away with a mysterious smile. "It's a secret." Alexander smirked. "Let me guess. Is this about a baby?" He sighed dramatically. "My mom used to pester me about that all the time." Olivia merely shrugged, her expression amused. "Why not?" she said, sipping her drink. Sophia blushed. And as Alexander laughed beside her, warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in her life, her future felt like her own. Aunt Lena clapped her hands in delight. "Oh, absolutely! I might have casually mentioned that we'd love a grandchild, so perhaps you can bring us that souvenir when you return." Sophia's face went up in flames. Alexander, ever composed, lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. "No need to worry," he said smoothly. "I'll make sure to bring back something truly special. Right, Sophia?" She yanked her hand away, her face burning hotter. "Will you stop talking about that already?" But Alexander only leaned in, his breath warm against her ear as he murmured, "We could start working on that souvenir the moment we get home to our new place. No need to delay." Sophia's breath hitched, her heart stuttering in her chest. "Alexander, hush," she hissed, flustered. Let's just go." Chuckling, Alexander stood and, in one swift motion, scooped her up into his arms. Startled, she let out a sharp yelp. "Hey, put me down!" He only held her closer, his embrace strong and unwavering. "Not a chance," he murmured with a grin. "Let's go, my statue girl. I love you." Her lips curled into a smile as she melted against him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I love you too, Alexander." After exchanging final goodbyes with their families, they stepped outside, the golden hues of sunset painting the sky as they walked toward their car. Alexander drove them to their new home, their first as husband and wife. As Sophia gazed out the window, her heart swelled with something unfamiliar yet comforting. Real love, she realized, sometimes arrives when you least expect it. She had never believed in marriage, not after witnessing the damage forced unions had inflicted on her own family. To her, marriage had always seemed like a cage, a sacrifice of freedom. But with Alexander, everything was different. With him, love wasn't a trap, it was a choice, a promise. A beautiful journey she wanted to take hand in hand for the rest of her life. And as they drove toward their future together, Sophia knew one thing for certain: she would cherish this man forever. Sometimes love finds us when we least expect it. Sophia spent her whole life believing marriage was just an obligation, a duty. But with Alexander, she discovered that real love is a choice, a promise, and a journey worth taking. It's not about who you're told to be with, but who truly makes you happy. So tell me, do you believe in fate when it comes to love, or do you think love is something we build over time? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more.